Welcome to Psychological Explorations with Dr. Michael Axelman and Daniela. We present on holding the situation, parental affect tolerance, limit setting, and the transition to object usage. You can find this article in the Journal of Infant, Child, and Adolescent Psychotherapy, Volume 8 in 2009. We begin with a summary. The relationship between parental affect tolerance and a distinct form of parent-child interaction that is located at the relational contact boundary, the limit between the child and the adult, is examined. Through the presentation of a parent therapy case of a 13-year-old girl, the paper suggests emotional self-awareness as a crucial mediator in one's ability to set limits consistently and parent effectively. Effective limit setting is highlighted as the critical parental task involved in seeing a child through the developmental phase that Winnicott referred to as the transition from object relating to object usage. Clinical approaches utilized to support this developmental process are presented with the aim of integrating theory and practice. We begin by looking at destructive behavior on the part of the child and survival from the perspective of the parent. Winnicott, back in 1971, described the psychotherapeutic work involved with seeing a child through this stage of development as the most irksome of all early failures that come from mending. Irksome because the object must face and survive aggression. Though extremely irritating at times for the parent, the process illuminates the positive value of the destructiveness. One can often quite clearly note the tremendous relief that is experienced by the child when the object survives. In this sense, children can really relax when they are assured that parents are in charge. Notwithstanding, survival in the face of interpersonal destructiveness is a great challenge indeed. The unproductive practices when setting limits that emerge when parents reach their emotional threshold include what I have come to refer to as the 3 R's. Retreating inward, away from the interpersonal boundary, rewarding the child's requests following an extensive tantrum, and retaliating and losing one's sense of poise while setting the limit. I will address these common parental pitfalls in more detail in the second half of the paper. Tolerance marks the cornerstone of the parental task Winnicott refers to as holding the situation. According to Winnicott, a mother's capacity to hold the situation over and over again at a critical period enables the infant's coexisting love and hate to become sorted out and interrelated and gradually brought under control from within in a way that is healthy. It is the mother's capacity to survive, remain calm, and non-retaliatory that enables the child to develop internal controls, which involves the development of the capacity for ambivalence. Winnicott's notion of holding the situation suggests the importance of parents tolerating and containing a range of emotions as an essential component to healthy child development. So what are limits anyway? First, limits are related to one's internal experience in a particular interpersonal situation. Parents will report they have reached their limit. They have had enough. In fact, some parents explicitly say that they scheduled the first appointment because they can't take it anymore. Here we are talking about a parent's subjective experience of reaching their limit. When a parent is referring to their subjective emotional limits, their emotional boiling point, the parent is discussing the self-regulatory process of tolerating negative affect. The other conception of the limit relates to the relational boundary that separates two people. Limit setting in the context of parenting assumes a hierarchy exists. The one in the position of power, the parent or teacher, sets limits. The child nested between object relating and object usage is engaged in a process that can be viewed as limit seeking. So we have a limit seeker and a limit setter, engaged in what can feel to the limit setter like highly charged activity at the relational contact boundary. And into parent therapy. Before launching into case material, a brief word on parent therapy. Parent therapy, sometimes referred to as parent counseling or parent consultation, is a modality that explicitly employs parents as therapeutic change agents. This powerful and economical approach to child treatment has received scant scholarly attention, though it has been part of psychoanalytic technique for more than 50 years. As Carr summarized, Winnicott worked with parents, and he also enlisted the assistance of parents as auxiliary therapists, realizing that much of the containment and interpretation of childhood mental illness could be undertaken by mothers and fathers themselves. Winnicott explicitly examined the use of this therapeutic modality in his papers, The Antisocial Tendency, 1956, and Strang, 1960, as well as the cases of Cecil and Peter in his collection Therapeutic Consultations in Child Psychiatry. In his discussion of Cecil, Winnicott noted that the parents in this case wished to play their part and were eager to carry out the boy's treatment themselves. They did, however, need to be told what they were doing and to be helped from time to time by myself as the psychiatrist who took responsibility throughout. In the case of Peter, Winnicott engaged both the parents and the school staff in the treatment of the child. Here then is the case of a boy whose antisocial symptomatology was severe. He was treated as ill, not naughty, and allowed to use his home as a mental hospital. In a year or so, he had recovered from his abnormal psychiatric state, and the work had been done by his mother and by the whole family, and by the capacity of the local boarding school to adapt to his special needs. We will see through the case that follows, helping the parents to adapt to the developmental needs of their child is an essential component of parent therapy. More recently, Jacob and Wachs, from the perspective of a relational psychoanalysis, and Herman from 2005 in this same journal, from an object relations perspective, have examined the modality of treating parents as a method of child treatment. While Winnicott's approach focuses primarily on helping parents better understand the child's perspective, Jacob and Wax and Herman alternately placed the treatment focus on helping parents better understand themselves. Though primarily anchored in Winnicott's object relations theory, the approach employed in this paper can be viewed as incorporating both of these aspects. That is, helping parents to better understand their children and themselves. This approach to parent therapy utilizes the positive valence in the transference between parent and therapist. In fact, parent therapy can be effective if parents have faith in the therapist and that the therapist has something to offer. Indeed, it is the positive transference that enables the therapist to illuminate the best parts of the parents. As such, parent therapy makes full use of the honeymoon period of a treatment, and for this reason lends itself to a briefer approach. The form of parent therapy discussed in this paper aims to help parents come to believe in their own capacities as caring adults and therapeutic change agents. When employed as a short-term approach, there is almost no emphasis placed on what is traditionally viewed as the working through of the negative transference, nor is there concern about the presence of some form of idealizing transference. As noted, the positive transference is instead utilized to help parents come to believe in their own capacities. The therapists reassure parents with the critical information that it is because of their long-standing caring relationship with their child that they are parents, in fact, are the best candidates to carry out the treatment. Parents know their child better than any other adult. Parents frequently hear the reassuring phrase in early treatment, the best place for healing and development to occur is in the home. And the best people to carry out this process are the parents. The next best option is the office carried out by the therapist. I will now tighten the focus of the analytic lens and examine more closely the subjectivity of the object that is engaged in setting limits. In particular, how does it feel as a parent to be destroyed? And what does it mean to communicate survival to a child in the throes of discovering his or her own limits? These questions will be explored through the presentation of a 13-year-old girl whose parents were seen in parent therapy. The case of the teenage toddler. Myra, a 13-year-old 8th grader, has been seen in school-based counseling by another therapist for the past 2.5 years. She was assigned to this particular therapist as part of her transition plan to middle school. Myra was fortunate to have had the same therapist for 6th, 7th, and now 8th grade. She was initially referred to counseling at the start of 6th grade because of her 5th grade teachers and administrators were concerned about her maturity level. Myra struggled to establish and maintain friendships with her peers and had a highly conflictual relationship with adults at the school. Her therapist reported that she was poor at reading social cues and had a limited understanding about how her behavior affected other people. Perhaps her most conspicuous feature was her demanding relational style. Myra was always thinking about Myra. Her therapist at school, who sought consultation with me, felt hopeless with the lack of progress. And the case over the past 2 years, she asked if I could meet with the parents and perhaps the child to provide a fresh perspective. Myra's therapist was feeling exhausted and frustrated by the case. After gathering some of the basic facts surrounding the case from the therapist, a meeting was arranged with the parents. Steve and Rosa entered the office apprehensively. Rosa mentioned on the phone that they have tried meeting with mental health professionals several times before and had not had any success. We briefly discussed some of their previous efforts. This included enrolling Myra in a social skills group in 5th grade. She was asked to leave the group after 5 sessions due to her disruptive behavior. 4 years before this initial consultation, when the family still lived in the Midwest, the parents began what was a brief and unproductive 3-session trial of family therapy. Steve and Rosa were considerably older than most parents of middle schoolers. Steve in his early 60s and Rosa in her early 50s. Steve lost his job in business 2 years ago. He considers himself semi-retired, though he would like nothing more than to have a job outside the home. He made it clear that he did not enjoy being a stay-at-home dad. Rosa, on the other hand, felt like she never quite had enough time at home. She was an executive of a mid-sized company, a job that required 60-hour work weeks. In terms of the practicalities of day-to-day life, Steve functioned reluctantly as the primary caretaker. He drove Myra to and from school and assisted with transporting her to her various after-school activities. Both parents described the bond between Steve and Myra as conflictual from the start. In fact, Steve had trouble mentioning any time in the past 13 years in which he felt like he had a positive connection to Myra. I could never console her when she cried as a baby. Only her mother could do that. Steve dejectedly reported. During this discussion, it was clear that Dad experienced a significant amount of anger and resentment about not having developed a better relationship with his daughter. Rosa, Myra's mother, on the surface, had a much more favorable connection with Myra. She reported 2 rather significant occurrences in our first meeting. The first was that Rosa and Myra had a bedtime routine going back to early childhood that involved very close snuggling with each other. Though acknowledging the regressive features, Mom reported liking this time very much. In fact, it was the only time in which she did not experience Myra as excessively demanding and insensitive. This was one of the few times during the day that she could be with Myra without feeling burdened by her. Steve, however, had no positive experiences with Myra to report. He said they were butting heads all the time. He was becoming more and more the taskmaster as Myra became more and more oppositional and obstinate. The typical weekend between December and April involved Rosa and Myra heading to the mountains together for a ski weekend. Steve would stay behind, bowl with his friends and his favorite basketball team and watch his favorite basketball team on television, and he gets his break. Myra loved snowboarding and was consistently unhappy at her local public middle school. Her parents decided to explore the idea of sending her to a boarding school where she could snowboard every day. In the midst of our meetings, they met several times with an educational consultant to explore the options of her attending a snowboarding boarding school, as they called it. When asked to discuss Myra's strengths, Dad smiled and said persistence. She's amazingly persistent, whether it is learning how to ride a bike or asking for a gift. Myra is hands down the most persistent person I know. Mom concurred, and it was very clear that everyone in the room understood that this strength, as it is so often the case, also was Myra's weakness. Steve and Rosa were in full agreement that Myra had too much power in the home, but they simply did not know what to do about it. Apart from the rather obvious fact that Myra was still psychologically anchored in the toddler stage of development, her developmental history was unremarkable, apart from one glaring feature, her birth story. Mom wanted to have a child very badly and was already past 40 years old. Dad was ambivalent at best, but supported his wife's desire to become pregnant through in vitro fertilization. Dad, who has adult children from his first marriage, had a vasectomy many years before. Myra was never told the detail of her birth story. The parents reported that they believe Myra thinks her dad is her biological father. When I inquired why they never told Myra about the circumstances surrounding her birth, Rosa chimed in quickly. She's not the kind of child who could handle hearing something like that. She'd just go crazy, berserk. Who knows what she would do? Steve said that he feared that telling her this would only give her more reasons to hate him. He could not imagine any good coming from such a conversation. A rather telling episode from the past week at home was reported in the second parent meeting. Rosa reported walking into the house and being immediately approached by Steve, who accused Myra of treating him in a defiant and disrespectful way. While Steve was talking to Rosa, Myra approached her as well to state her own opinion about what had occurred. Myra started to raise her voice, and Steve's voice became louder, and a two-way screaming match with Mom in the middle ensued. After a few moments, Rosa stated firmly, "You two are going to have to figure this out yourselves." Rosa walked away extremely frustrated about how she was greeted entering the house. Mom felt as if she was intervening in a sibling quarrel. Dad felt unsupported by his wife and treated as an immature child. Rosa expressed that it was not possible for her to support her husband when he acts in such a rude and childlike way. The other key episode that was reported in the second session was Rosa's experience of Steve's anger. Rosa said that she would often find herself asking Steve why he was speaking to her in a loud voice, if he was angry with her. Rosa would at times need clarification from Steve in his loud voice that she found very upsetting. Rosa would at times need clarification from Steve that the intense way of relating to her was not in fact anger. Steve would answer that he's not angry and just tense and frustrated by the situation. Steve admitted that he often displayed his emotions openly, expressively, and sometimes insensitively. Rosa said to Steve, "If I feel your anger like this when you're not even angry at me, imagine how Myra feels when you are truly mad at her." There was a healthy pause in the room after Rosa made this statement. Steve seemed to be taking in what Rosa had to say. Following my second meeting with the parents, several themes emerged. First, it was clear the family was not functioning as a unit and had not done so for many years. Dad was isolated from his wife and daughter and felt unappreciated by both. At one point, he listed the priorities of the family, that is, the priorities of Rosa and Myra, and he placed the cat above him on the list. Dad was hurt and felt tremendous loss about not having a functioning relationship with either his daughter or his wife. But what he expressed was anger and rage. Mom was able to talk openly about her guilt. At one point, she stated in a matter-of-fact tone, "I feel like I brought a monster into the world and it's my fault Myra is like this." In addition to feeling guilty about bringing a child into the world that is so difficult to be with, Rosa also felt guilty about working so many long hours away from the family. She truly wanted Myra to be happy those precious few hours they had together in the evening and on the weekends. Rosa and Myra have become embedded in a cycle of relating in which Myra presented as a deprived child and Rosa responded and reacted as the guilty, quick-to-gratify parent. Saft, in her 1997 article, used the term for this process, bartering for love. And it's particularly apt. In this relational cycle, the parent secures love from the child in exchange for gratifying his or her every request. We move now to the intervention. The focus on my work with Rosa and Steve involved helping them reframe their perceptions of their daughter. From a child who is deprived, that is the narrative that Myra is always putting words on, to a child who is confused, scared, and terribly anxious. Myra's excessive demands were part of her desperate attempt to manage her anxiety in the face of overwhelming possibility. She could practically make her parents do anything. On the third meeting, Mom reported that Myra had visited Disneyland 13 times. In addition to helping them see their child frightened and limit-seeking, I attempted to help both Mom and Dad set better limits. Rosa needed assistance in the general task of saying no and disappointing Myra. Rosa needed to resist her urges to give in to Myra's demands, especially to resist her urge to retreat from the contract boundary. Rosa was asked to stay present with Myra during her tantrums. One of her strengths was her ability to remain calm, so this was not an issue. Staying present in the face of Myra's destructiveness was Rosa's key task. This was so challenging for Rosa because, on an unconscious level, she really felt that she deserved this treatment. As she processed her guilt in the upcoming sessions, she became more and more confident in her capacity to remain present with Myra when she acted her worst. So Mother's primary task in the face of limit setting was to come to tolerate her feelings of guilt and at the same time remain calm, firm, and present while saying no and setting limits at the relational contact boundary. Steve, who was already able to communicate firmness at the limit, needed help in managing his anger and his tendency to retaliate in the face of Myra's destructiveness. Our work together in parent therapy involved helping Steve get in touch with his internal subjective sense of his own emotional limits. Over time, he developed a degree of self-awareness around his emotional triggers as he made small but noticeable steps in remaining outwardly calm as he approached his emotional boiling point in the face of Myra's demanding and destructive efforts. Dad appreciated the use of a basketball metaphor to help illuminate the task of limit setting. Setting limits is a bit like setting a good pick or taking a charge in basketball, I said. The limit, like taking a charge, is only effective if both feet are planted firmly on the ground. If you are moving when you're setting a limit, you're not doing it correctly. Think about limit setting in the context of a street basketball game. There's no referees, so you have to call your own fouls. As your opponent approaches, you plant your feet, establish your position, and take a charge. After you take the charge, you call the foul. That is, you set the limit and calmly deliver the consequences. Retaliating when taking a charge is a violation of the rules of the game. So revisiting the common parenting pitfalls, the 3 R's we discussed earlier. The key parental task involved to seeing a child through this most tumultuous of all childhood transitions involves staying present with the child and not retreating, firm at the limit and not rewarding the child's tantrum, calm without retaliating. Parents who are prone to retreat from the contact boundary during these heightened moments are easily overwhelmed by strong emotional expressions. The retreat inadvertently reinforces the child's sense of power with respect to parental relationships. When a parent retreats from the boundary, he or she sends the message that I cannot tolerate being with you in these enraged and frightened states, thus reinforcing the child's sense of omnipotence, the key feature of the developmental stage of object relating. Similarly, parents who capitulate to the child's demands and say yes after repeatedly saying no inadvertently reward the child's behavior. This relational scenario typically takes the form of a war of attrition, with the child simply wearing the parent down through multiple requests and guilt-inducing strategies. In this case, the parent needs to come to appreciate the detrimental effects associated with rewarding the child's tantrum and to see how giving in to the child's demands reinforces the child's sense of power and omnipotence. Alternately, the parent who retaliates takes the low road and becomes explosive at the contact boundary with the child. It is this parent who is prone towards joining the child in a loud verbal altercation, with the rage getting tossed back and forth until the child becomes overwhelmed by the parental authority. To borrow an analogy from the world of computers, if the child is able to toss the parent offline, that is to make the parents engage in operations that are not part of an effective parenting program, this also reinforces the child's sense of omnipotence. We can imagine this child thinking, wow, I have the power to make my father do things he does not want to do, thus reinforcing the child's illusion of absolute influence. In summary, the creative and constructive role of anger and aggression in parent-child relationships has been examined. The deleterious impact of affect intolerance on parents' capacity to set limits, especially as the task relates to seeing the child through the stage of object relating to object usage, has been highlighted. The therapeutic work in the case presented focused on helping each of the parents to identify and overcome and over time come to tolerate negative emotional states that interfered with their capacity to communicate clearly and set limits firmly with their child. Rosa, the mother, was prone to yield to the unrelenting demands of her child's wishes. An effort was made to help her come to terms with her guilt and the way in which her guilt influenced her capacity to parent from a position of authority. Parent therapy focused on helping this father to hold the situation by incrementally coming to tolerate his own powerful emotions of anger and disappointment without immediately fleeing into retaliatory activity. As both parents increased their capacity for affect tolerance, their ability to set consistent limits increased, while their capacity to parent effectively improved their child's unyielding, relentless demands. While their capacity to parent effectively improved, their child's unyielding, relentless demands at the face of the limit decreased. Calm, firm, unyielding limits at the relational contact boundary are the rules of engagement that are needed to see a child through this most irksome of all developmental transitions. Children are ushered into mutuality, shared reality, and the world of relationships through the setting of calm, firm, and consistently unyielding limits during this critical stage of development. Thank you for joining us today for another presentation of psychological explorations. Come back and join us in the future. Take care for now.